It sat there in the palm of a flea market dealer's hand, just another silver-colored disc gleaming faintly under the morning sun. Hundreds of people had passed by it, brushing it off as common, ordinary, unremarkable. But the truth was far more astonishing. What looked like an everyday $half for 1972 was actually a gateway into one of the most fascinating stories in American numismatic history. It wasn't just a coin. It was a frozen moment from a country in transition, a tribute to a fallen leader, and a sleeper gem that would one day shock the coin-collecting world when it fetched $190,000 at a high-profile auction. Most people would never have guessed its value, not even seasoned collectors, unless they knew exactly what to look for. This was the 1972 Kennedy $half, a coin born from legacy, designed with pride, and preserved in mystery. To understand why this coin commands such reverence today, you have to go back to its origin. The Kennedy $half series began in 1964, struck just months after President John F. Kennedy's tragic assassination in Dallas, Texas. In an extraordinary act of mourning and national solidarity, Congress rushed the approval for a new coin design bearing his image. The American people, still reeling from the loss, welcomed the change. The Franklin $half was retired overnight, and the youthful, forward-facing profile of John F. Kennedy took its place on the obverse. His memory was now etched not just in history books, but into the very currency millions would hold in their hands. Fast forward to 1972, a time when the United States was mired in political turbulence and economic uncertainty. The Vietnam War lingered, the Watergate scandal was in its infancy, and inflation loomed like a storm cloud over the average American household. And yet, amid this social and economic noise, the Kennedy $half continued its silent journey through cash registers, paychecks, and piggy banks. Most were ordinary, but a small number, just a whisper among the mint's output, were far from normal. These coins held subtle differences, born of minting quirks, planchet irregularities, or transitional dyes, that would make them the centerpieces of numismatic lore decades later. The 1972 Kennedy $half was officially struck only in copper-nickel clad at the Philadelphia and Denver mints, with a few special strikes coming from San Francisco. No silver coins were issued for circulation that year, making any such appearance exceedingly rare. Yet, what elevates this coin into the upper echelon of collectible U.S. currency isn't merely what it's made of, but how it was made, and what went slightly, beautifully wrong in the process. It is these minute variations, these deviations from the norm, that collectors chase. One such variation, an ultra-rare specimen bearing an extraordinary reverse die from a different year, went unnoticed for decades before it finally surfaced. When it did, it shattered expectations and redefined what collectors thought they knew about 1970s U.S. coinage. Unlike the earlier 1964 issue, which was composed of 90% silver, the 1972 version bore no silver content for the public. But at least one coin escaped this rule. One 1972 Kennedy $half is known to have been struck on a leftover 40% silver planchet intended for a previous year's coin. This error, impossible to spot by eye but revealed through careful testing and weighing, created a unicorn in the numismatic world. Its existence confirmed suspicions that the transition from silver was not without its hiccups, and that some silver planchets may have lingered in the minting machinery longer than officially recorded. The result was a coin so rare, so unusual, and so prized that collectors began combing through their old coin rolls with renewed intensity, hoping to find a twin. But even the non-silver errors held secrets. A few coins bore reverse designs meant for proof coins only, accidentally struck by dies not intended for mass production. These anomalies gave the 1972 Kennedy $half a mysterious dual identity, combining the mass-circulated exterior with proof-like features that shimmered under light and captured even the most skeptical observer's attention. These hybrid coins, hiding in plain sight, were mistaken for ordinary change for years until finally being recognized for the rarities they were. The appeal of the 1972 Kennedy $half is not just in its rarity or potential error status. It lies in its symbolism, its endurance, and the emotional weight it carries. For many Americans, Kennedy was the last image of hopeful leadership before a long era of disillusionment. His presence on this coin reminds people of a time when possibilities still seemed infinite. That emotional connection gives the coin an added layer of significance that transcends its monetary worth. By the time news broke of a 1972 Kennedy half-dollar selling for an astonishing $190,000, the numismatic community was abuzz. How could a coin from such a high mintage year reach such a price? The answer was simple but profound. Condition, rarity, provenance, and the story behind it. This particular coin had all four. It had been preserved in a bank-wrapped roll, untouched for decades, until finally discovered and sent for grading. The grading agency awarded it a near-perfect score, noting its unblemished surfaces, frosted devices, and mirror-like fields. It was, for all practical purposes, a time capsule. And when it came up for auction, collectors recognized its value instantly. It began as just another coin moving through the machinery of the Philadelphia Mint, a flicker of metal that most would never notice and even fewer would remember. But within that ordinary stream of copper and nickel alloy, one particular 1998 Kennedy half-dollar would one day rise above the rest, not for its weight or its metallic value, but because of a tiny deviation, a perfect storm of minting anomaly, historical coincidence, and collector fascination. That coin, once pocket change, would command a jaw-dropping value of $105,000 and become one of the most talked-about modern rarities in the world of numismatics. The story of this unassuming coin cannot be fully appreciated without returning to the roots of its series. The Kennedy half-dollar was born out of a nation's grief, a swift and symbolic tribute to a beloved president whose life was cut short by an assassin's bullet in 1963. The transition from the Franklin half-dollar to the Kennedy design took only weeks, a record-setting redesign driven by emotion rather than economic demand. By early 1964, the first Kennedy half-dollars began rolling out of the mints, and the American public responded with fervor. People lined up to get them, hoarded them, refused to spend them, and in some ways, preserved them more as mementos than as money. Decades passed, and while the coin remained in production, its role in everyday commerce faded. Fewer and fewer people used half-dollars in regular transactions. Still, collectors stayed loyal. The Kennedy half-dollar continued to evolve with each passing year, adopting different mint marks, finishes, and occasional commemorative releases. By the time 1998 arrived, the coin had largely settled into a quiet rhythm. It was produced mainly for collectors and circulated sparingly. Yet in this year of relative obscurity, something extraordinary happened. It's easy to overlook the significance of the 1998 issue at first glance. There were no major anniversaries tied to Kennedy. No special design changes were officially announced. But behind the scenes, two things were happening that would ultimately shape the destiny of one remarkable coin. First, the Mint was preparing for the launch of the John F. Kennedy Commemorative Coin Series, which would kick off the following year with a gold coin struck in honor of Kennedy's legacy. And second, there was a quiet experimentation happening within the Mint's facilities as they tested dies and finishes in anticipation of the new millennium. Somewhere in the midst of this experimentation, a small number of 1998 Kennedy half-dollars were struck using proof dies, but ended up in non-proof production runs. These coins bore an unusual finish, sharper than the standard strike, with details that stood out in crisp relief and surfaces that appeared partially mirrored. They were not quite proof, not quite business strike, but something in between. Collectors would later refer to these as hybrid strikes or transitional errors, and they would become some of the most coveted examples from the modern era. One such coin, minted in Philadelphia, found its way into a standard collector's roll and remained hidden for years. It passed through hands, overlooked, undervalued, and nearly forgotten. But eventually, an attentive collector with an eye for detail spotted something unusual in the luster and relief of the coin. It was submitted for professional grading, and what came back stunned even seasoned experts. It was designated as a specimen strike, a classification rarely given, indicating a coin with special handling or intentional differences, often made for presentation or internal purposes. This was no ordinary half-dollar. The coin's sharpness, clarity, and extraordinary condition led it to receive a near-perfect grade, and with that grade came attention. Collectors and investors alike began scouring their collections for similar anomalies. Forums buzzed, auction houses took notice, and the legend of the 1998 Kennedy half-dollar began to grow. When this particular coin finally hit the auction block, the bidding was fast and furious. What started at a modest few $1,000s escalated into a six-figure war between private collectors and institutional buyers. By the time the gavel dropped, the final price reached a staggering $105,000, rewriting the record books for modern half-dollars. In the fading warmth of the 1970s, a new chapter in American coinage quietly began, unnoticed by most but destined to spark fascination decades later. The year was 1979, a time of economic flux, rising fuel prices, disco still pulsing through the airwaves, and an evolving sense of identity for a country moving into a new era. Amid the broader societal shifts, the United States Mint continued its steady and essential work, churning out coins that would pass through millions of hands, drop into vending machines, fill piggy banks, and, for some, become the center of numismatic treasure hunts. Among these was the Kennedy half-dollar, a coin whose image bore the gravitas of a lost president, yet whose design and metal content quietly reflected the shifting priorities of an era still grappling with inflation, tradition, and change. When the first Kennedy half-dollars were struck in 1964, they carried a heavy emotional weight. The nation had not yet recovered from the assassination of John F. Kennedy, and the coin served as both a tribute and a reminder, a shining silver disc bearing the image of a man who had represented hope to millions. By the time 1979 arrived, the coin had seen numerous changes. Its original 90% silver content had long since been reduced to a copper-nickel-clad composition, and its usage in daily commerce had dwindled as Americans leaned increasingly toward quarters and dollar bills. Still, the Kennedy half-dollar endured, stubbornly remaining in circulation, still bearing the profile of JFK in crisp, dignified detail. That year, something subtle but crucial changed in the production of the half-dollar. While casual collectors and the general public might not have noticed, those with a keen eye, those who studied mint marks, font variations, and strike depths, would later discover that the 1979 Kennedy half-dollar was not as ordinary as it seemed. It was, in fact, a numismatic puzzle hiding in plain sight, a relic produced in several varieties, each with its own story to tell. In the mints of Philadelphia and Denver, machines clicked and clattered, stamping millions of coins each week. But it was in San Francisco, where the proof coins were born, that the unexpected variation occurred. These proof coins were crafted with care and polish, intended not for circulation but for collectors. The 1979's Kennedy half-dollar came in two types: Type 1, with a blobby, indistinct S mint mark, and Type 2, with a crisp, clear S. That would become one of the most sought-after subtleties in modern coin collecting. The difference was minute but significant, a nuance in engraving that only the most observant would recognize, yet one that would elevate the Type 2 variety to legend. Collectors would come to treasure the 1979's Type 2 as a symbol of rarity within abundance. Of the millions of proof sets sold that year, only a fraction contained the Type 2 variety, making it a needle in a haystack for those determined to find one. But scarcity alone doesn't tell the whole story. What makes this coin so enthralling is not just its rarity, but the context in which it was born, a time when the mint was transitioning, experimenting, perfecting. The crisp S wasn't a mistake. It was an upgrade, a correction, a silent refinement that slipped into circulation without announcement, letting fate and fortune decide who might receive it. Meanwhile, in Denver and Philadelphia, the 1979 Kennedy half-dollars bore their own quirks. The D and no mint mark coins produced for general circulation were struck by the tens of millions, yet even among these, examples exist with unusually strong strikes, deep cameo features, and sharp detail, conditions that defy their mass-produced nature. Some were tucked away in mint sets, others saved by foresight collectors, and a few remained in circulation long enough to be scarred by time before being pulled aside for examination. Each coin tells a different story. Some glint with the pristine glow of untouched metal, others show the wear of years spent in pockets and drawers. But all are pieces of a larger narrative, one that links mint workers, designers, collectors, and the broader public in a shared moment of history. The design itself had changed little since 1964. Gilroy Roberts' profile of Kennedy on the obverse remained commanding, etched with dignity and resolve. The reverse, designed by Frank Casparo, continued to bear the presidential seal, a heraldic eagle clutching olive branches and arrows, surrounded by stars and encircled by the words, "United States of America," and "half dollar." But even in this familiar imagery, subtle differences emerged. In 1979, the relief of the strike varied between mints, the clarity of features differed based on dieware, and the luster ranged from dull to dazzling. Some coins were common. Others, despite being born of the same molds, emerged with characteristics so extraordinary that collectors would pay thousands, eventually tens of thousands, to call them their own. In time, tales began to circulate among coin dealers and hobbyists. A 1979 D in near-perfect condition sold for an unexpectedly high price. A proof set opened after decades revealed a Type 2 mint mark gleaming beneath layers of velvet and plastic. Word spread on forums, at conventions, and through catalogs. What had once been considered an ordinary coin of the late 20th century was rapidly becoming a star in the collector's galaxy. The excitement was not just in the ownership, but in the discovery, the thrill of examining coins once dismissed as pocket change and finding, in them, hidden gems. And then, as the decades passed, one example emerged that would eclipse all others. It wasn't just well preserved. It wasn't merely a Type 2. It was a flawless specimen, a coin struck with such precision, preserved with such care, and evaluated with such scrutiny that it defied expectations. Graded by one of the leading coin certification services as a perfect proof, with no visible blemishes even under magnification, it represented the pinnacle of what a 1979 Kennedy half dollar could be. As word of its sale spread, collectors were stunned. This single coin, this once 50-cent piece, had commanded an astonishing price, $105,000. The year was 2021, and the world stood in cautious anticipation of what lay ahead. A global pandemic had reshaped daily life, economies were adapting to new digital realities, and the United States found itself balancing tradition with transformation. Amidst all this, in the bustling facilities of the United States Mint, something remarkable was unfolding, something that would go unnoticed by most, yet would later spark whispers and awe within the coin collecting community. A coin, humble in denomination yet rich in legacy, emerged from the presses with quiet dignity. It was the 2021 P. Kennedy half dollar, minted in Philadelphia, a continuation of a series that had captivated collectors for over half a century. But this year's coin would become anything but ordinary. As millions of hands reached for quarters and dollar bills in everyday transactions, few realized that the Kennedy half dollar, a coin once vital in daily commerce, had transformed into a collector's secret, a low-mintage anomaly, produced not for circulation, but for the faithful few who still treasured the art of coinage. And it was in this limited run, in this quiet issuance, that the legend of the 2021 P. Kennedy half dollar began to take root. Its origins weren't flashy. No ceremonies were held. There were no press releases. It simply appeared, an official issue, but with a destiny far grander than its face value could ever suggest. The Philadelphia Mint, known for its vast production capabilities and historical significance, had been producing coins since 1792. But in 2021, the Kennedy half dollar was minted in sharply lower quantities compared to coins of the past. No longer a mainstay of everyday commerce, it was issued in rolls and bags for collectors, making each coin that much rarer in the wild. Though millions were technically minted, they were not released into broad circulation. This made each coin feel like a hidden artifact, found not in change, but in the deeper channels of numismatic passion. The design, of course, bore the familiar visage of John F. Kennedy, his profile bold and elegant against the smooth fields of the coin's surface. Created originally by Gilroy Roberts in 1964, the obverse design remained largely unchanged, a timeless tribute to a president who symbolized hope, energy, and vision. Yet in 2021, the portrait seemed to take on new meaning. Against the backdrop of global uncertainty, economic tension, and social transformation, Kennedy's image was a reminder of leadership under pressure, of calm resolve in turbulent times. The reverse, designed by Frank Casparo, retained its iconic imagery: a majestic presidential seal, eagle spread wide, olive branch and arrows gripped in balance, stars encircling like the unbroken union they represent. But in certain lighting, the 2021 strike revealed a brilliance, a crispness of detail that spoke to modern minting technology and the care invested in these special issues. For collectors, this coin was not merely another Kennedy half. It was a finely made, precision-crafted artifact of its time. Yet, what truly set the 2021 P. Kennedy half-dollar apart were the unexpected discoveries that followed. Not long after the coins were shipped and delivered, stories began to emerge. Coins with unusual luster. Coins struck with more intensity, producing mirror-like surfaces on both obverse and reverse. And then, most curiously, coins with what appeared to be minting anomalies: die breaks, double strikes, off-center strikes, and even a handful struck on improper planchets. These errors, rare by nature, are the fuel of modern numismatic obsession. And the 2021 P half-dollar, against all odds, seemed to offer them in just enough frequency to ignite the chase. One such coin, a 2021 Kennedy half-dollar struck with extreme clarity and almost proof-like quality, was sent in for grading. What returned from the grading service stunned even seasoned dealers. The coin received a near-perfect grade, something almost unheard of for business strikes from this period. Another example revealed an off-center strike so dramatic and pristine that it defied logic. How such a piece slipped past inspection was anyone's guess. And so, the whispers began. Could it be that the 2021 P issue, minted in smaller numbers and distributed quietly, had yielded a treasure trove of high-grade and error coins? As months passed, more stories surfaced. A collector in the Midwest found a bag containing multiple coins with sharp die clashes, images of Kennedy's profile ghosted onto the reverse. Another enthusiast, carefully examining a roll, discovered doubling in the date and mint mark, possibly the result of a minor misalignment during production. Each story, each photograph, each certification began to form a mosaic, a bigger picture of a coin that was quietly becoming legendary. It didn't take long for the market to react. What had once been a simple modern issue, available directly from the mint, was now commanding attention on auction platforms, collector forums, and dealer tables across the country. Prices climbed steadily at first, then surged. Coins in pristine condition, especially those with confirmed anomalies, started breaking past the usual thresholds. Some sold for hundreds, others for thousands. And then came the remarkable moment. An auction, well attended and buzzing with speculation, saw a gem-quality 2021 P. Kennedy half-dollar error coin, flawless and dramatic, sell for over $3,300, and that was only the beginning. One day, without fanfare, a coin surfaced that would become the crown jewel of the 2021 P. Kennedy half-dollar story. It had all the hallmarks of an anomaly: deep die polishing lines, full strike, and a mint error that seasoned experts had never before seen on a half-dollar. Certified at the highest possible grade, accompanied by photographic documentation and impeccable provenance, it shocked the collecting world when the final gavel came down at a staggering $115,000. How did such value arise from a 50-cent coin? It wasn't just rarity. It was narrative. It was timing. It was quality, mystery, and market hunger converging in perfect harmony. The coin told a story, not just of the year it was minted, but of the people who found it, the thrill of discovery, and the community that rallied around it. The 2021 P. Kennedy half-dollar had transcended its humble origins to become a legend, a symbol of how even the most unassuming artifacts can hold extraordinary secrets. Underneath the fluorescent lights of a small-town antique store, buried between tarnished jewelry and forgotten baseball cards, lay a single coin wrapped in a protective sleeve, almost overlooked. It wasn't flashy or golden. It didn't glimmer like freshly minted currency. But there was something quietly dignified about it, something that made a seasoned collector stop in his tracks. The year etched into the face read 1973, and the profile was instantly recognizable: John F. Kennedy, his gaze fixed forward in solemn confidence. It was a Kennedy half-dollar, like millions of others produced that year. But this one would turn out to be anything but ordinary. What started as a modest collector's curiosity would spiral into one of the most astonishing valuation stories in modern numismatics, where a single 1973 Kennedy half-dollar eventually stunned the coin-collecting world by commanding between $15,000 and an eye-watering $115,000 at auction.to. Appreciate how this coin reached such extraordinary value. One must first return to the origin of the Kennedy half-dollar itself. It was never meant to be just another coin. It was, from its very first strike in 1964, a symbol of national mourning and unity. In the days following President Kennedy's assassination in November 1963, there was a wave of grief unlike anything America had seen. Congress moved swiftly to honor the fallen leader, and within months, the Franklin half-dollar was replaced. John F. Kennedy's image became part of America's coinage tradition, not just as currency, but as a tribute that could be held in the palm of every citizen. Nearly a decade later, in 1973, the Kennedy half-dollar was still in production, but the nation had changed. The country was now entangled in the final years of the Vietnam War. President Nixon's administration faced deepening scrutiny as the Watergate scandal simmered just beneath the public surface. Inflation had begun to erode confidence in the dollar. And amid all of that turmoil, the U.S. Mint continued its work, pressing coins that would circulate through gas stations, diners, bank tellers, and grocery stores. The Kennedy half-dollar was no longer a novelty. It had become a fixture. But even within that routine, 1973 had a few surprises to offer. The mintage numbers for the year tell part of the story. The Denver and Philadelphia mints combined to produce over 150 million Kennedy half-dollars. Yet what few collectors realized at the time was that none of these coins were released for general circulation. Unlike most years, the 1973 half-dollars were minted exclusively for inclusion in U.S. Mint sets. That alone made them scarcer than usual, and those that did survive were often well preserved, sealed in cellophane packaging by collectors who bought the sets new. The average person, unless they were a numismatist, would likely never see a 1973 Kennedy half-dollar in the wild. That small detail would prove to be the seed of future rarity. But rarity alone doesn't make a coin valuable. What does is a confluence of factors: an impeccable strike, the perfect grade, and sometimes a mistake. Among the 1973 Kennedy half-dollars, certain examples displayed subtle irregularities in the planchet or die. A few had doubling on the date or lettering. Others had odd luster patterns, suggesting experimental finishes. One coin, however, stood out from the rest. It appeared under the microscope at a grading service facility, its surfaces shimmering with a proof-like reflection, its devices showing razor-sharp detail. It wasn't a proof coin, and yet it possessed characteristics far beyond a standard business strike. The grader paused. A discovery was unfolding. Upon further analysis, it became clear that this coin had been struck with a highly polished die, possibly one intended for a proof or presentation strike. It bore none of the signs of mass production: no bag marks, no flattening, no weak spots. Its fields were mirror smooth. Its devices popped out with almost unnatural clarity. Submitted for authentication and grading, it returned with a grade that few modern coins could ever dream of achieving. The coin was given a near-perfect MS-69 designation, and instantly, its fate changed. The collector who found it had unknowingly stumbled across a treasure, a flawless survivor of a highly specific mintage year. Word of this find spread quickly through collector forums, auction houses, and coin shows. Articles were written, interviews conducted, and suddenly, everyone wanted to know more about the 1973 Kennedy half-dollar. Was this an isolated case? Were there more like it hidden in mint sets, untouched for decades? Collectors began ripping open their old packaging, examining coins that had sat idle for over 40 years. Dealers reevaluated their inventory. Grading services saw a surge in 1973 half-dollar submissions.